بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما إلى علمنا، اللهم آمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا الاتباع وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا الاجتناب، اللهم آمين. Inshallah ta'ala, continuing our series of fiqh, of actions related to the month of Ramadan. The last 2 weeks we took two classes on, or two lessons on zakat, and so if you missed those, then go ahead and check those out in the archives of this webpage of this YouTube channel. And if you have any questions about anything, then feel free to email me, imamchris@icp-pgh.org. So going on with the fiqh of fasting, Bismillah. The fiqh of fasting, usually the books of fiqh, they start off this chapter with a number of topics related to the sighting of the month and how the beginning of the month of Ramadan is determined. However, since in our masjid and our community, the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh, we have been for several years going through ISNA, and technically ICP is a ISNA masjid, meaning that a lot of the affairs of the back end affairs, so to speak, are loosely governed by ISNA, and ISNA also serves as an arbitration in different ways. But because of that, the ICP follows the ISNA calculations and their method of determining the month and the beginning of the month of Ramadan specifically. And so because of that, we it's and to be united in that sense, at least, and not to cause division, we are going to yield to that. And even there's a very, very small minority of scholars in the history of Islam that have allowed the use of calculations for citing for inaugurating the month of Ramadan. And even though there might be some dispute about the validity of using their opinions and what their opinions actually were, but inshallah ta'ala, the fact that there exists a number of scholars that believe that means that it's within the Sunni madhahib. Then inshallah ta'ala, it is something that is permissible for us to look in and take as an option. So that's why we do that. And there are many masajid throughout the United States that also agree, or that they have done that for the sake of convenience more than anything else, especially because we are living in a society that does not do that automatically and does not change itself in any way for the month of Ramadan. In fact, most people around on the street that are not Muslim, they have no idea when the month of Ramadan comes or ends or anything like that. There's no announcement, no nothing. It's been a long time struggling from Muslims and campaigning just to even get Eid al-Fitr or Ramadan just put on a calendar. Subhanallah. But anyway, I digress. So moving on to the actual fiqh, we're going to, because of what we have already determined for the start of Ramadan and how we figure that out, we're going to skip past some of those issues and go straight to what might immediately concern us. But first of all, just a couple of definitions. First of all, this is kind of interesting. Sawm and Siyam. These are two words that a lot of times we might use interchangeably to mean fasting. However, in the Quran does distinguish between the two. And if you follow up on the different ayahs, where the word siyam is used, and the one single ayah where Sawm is used in the Quran, you're going to notice a difference in their meanings, or in the difference in their usage. And even though they both mean abstaining, however, there's a difference in what they're abstaining from. With siyam, every single time it's used, it is used in the context of the fasting that we are accustomed to, fasting from food, drink, and sexual activity. Whereas the word Sawm, which is only used in one single ayah in the Quran, إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لِلرَّحْمَنِ صَوْمًا, I have made an oath to Ar-Rahman to fast. And then Maryam alayhi salam continues by saying, فَلَا أُكَلِّمُ الْيَوْمَ that I will not be speaking to any person. Afwan. So this is abstaining from speech. However, a lot of times colloquially, both words are used interchangeably, Sawm and Siyam. And in fact, even in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, a man, as I recall, he had made an oath to do a variety of acts, and the Prophet ﷺ told him that some of those acts were unnecessary and he should not do them, and that, however, he said, فَلْيُتِمْ صَوْمَهُ, and let him complete his fast, and he used the word Sawm. So this distinction between Siyam and Sawm, this is specifically and purely in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes that distinction. However, even the Prophet ﷺ did not make that distinction, so it's not incumbent upon us to do so. Likewise, the word Ramadan itself has the meaning of burning, and to burn, and that's a lot of there's a lot of different ideas of what the munasaba has. However, because the month of Ramadan was known even before the fasting was decreed, but the munasaba and the wisdom, obviously, as you know, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed that it would become a month of fasting and a month of forgiveness and mercy, all of ulama say that the appropriateness is that the month of Ramadan is a time where the sins are burned away because of our fasting. And likewise, one last vocabulary word is the word Eid, inshallah ta'ala. And when it comes to Eid al-Fitr, for example, and different ahkam, different rulings related to Eid, and also i'tikaf, inshallah ta'ala, we'll save those for later, inshallah, and zakat al-fitr, for example. But Eid is anything that, ya'udu Eidan, anything that returns repeatedly. So an Eid is something that is going to be returning, and for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would refer to something as an Eid if it was something that would be repeated regularly. Now, one of the first most important questions is who fasts? Upon who is fasting obligatory in Islam? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. So whoever among you witnesses the month, then they should fast it. So what does this tell us? And what the scholars of Islam agreed upon is that it refers to all accountable. That it means mukallaf in Arabic. Accountable is mukallaf, someone who is responsible by the Sharia. They are, which means balighun aqil. Aqil, they have a mind. They possess full faculties of rationalization and reasoning, in spite of variance of intelligence between people. and also they have passed the stage of puberty. They have reached puberty. So there's nothing and there's no concept of Islam about, reaching the age of 18 or anything like that. Once you are mukallaf, baligun, aqil, you have hit puberty, and you're capable of rational thought, then you are accountable in the deen of Islam. You are a full adult, and anything that you say can be used against you on the Day of Judgment in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also healthy residing Muslims, as in the ayah, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ مِنْكُم, from you, from the Muslims. So this is that's why, for example, in the countries of Islam and in the history of the Khilafah, for example, it was not required for non-Muslims to fast. However, during the time of the Caliphate, for example, there were sometimes there might be fines or might be banned for non-Muslims to eat publicly or in the presence of Muslims. As, if you, for example, when you fast at home, and if you're fasting and spending time at home, and maybe there's someone in the household who is not fasting, then if they're eating in front of you, eating a big sandwich or whatever it might be they're eating, it can be a little bit bothersome to you, especially knowing that you cannot do so, and just to make it so that it's not the way that non-Muslims might try to belittle the acts of Islam. So that's why it was prohibited and banned in certain areas or in certain times and places to eat in front of Muslims during the day of Ramadan. Now, residing, of course, that means, what I mean by that is not traveling, and healthy is the opposite of sick. What kind of sickness are we talking about? We'll get to later. So a little bit more about that. Children 7 and older who has not reached puberty, are they obligated to fast? This is a bit of a contentious issue, because first of all, with fasting in the Sharia and with acts of Islam in general, what's important is teaching your children. That's your responsibility as a parent, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nara. O you who have believed, save yourselves and your families from a fire. And the Prophet ﷺ has given some guidance regarding that, saying to command your children to pray at the age of 7, and then strike them for it or beat them over it at the age of 10 if they don't pray. So following that guidance, most ulama that I know of have made qiyas with that and said that you should likewise command your children to fast at the age of 7. And so for example, if they're 7, 8, 9 years old, and of course this would be Hijri years, which would be almost 7 years old, minus maybe a month, but so they would be commanded to fast. However, if they break their fast, if they are cheating with their fast in any way whatsoever, then you've done your part. You've done what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked, what Allah and His Messenger have asked you to do, which is command them to do that. And this was something that was practiced by some of the Sahaba, as some of them mention that they commanded their children to fast, and if they were crying, then they would, for example, give them a toy to play with. And it's good to encourage children, and when you make the Ramadan spirit lively at home, then inshallah ta'ala, hopefully the children will be encouraged to join with that and will be motivated to be a part of that, and especially to break fast with the parents. And one thing about that too is that with with breaking the fast with the parents. So, for example, children that are younger, um, some families, what they might do is, when the children want to fast, is have them fast the first half of the day, for example, or increasing in hours over time or as years progress. And honestly, I mean, with that, I think that sounds great. Also, another idea. I mean, whether you want to have them fast the first half of the day or the latter half of the day, that is up to you. However, at least one of those meals should be together, whether you have suhoor together, for example, or if you have iftar in the evening together, to make it more of a family event, inshallah ta'ala. Also, forbidden from fasting are women experiencing their cycle. And as when it comes to also, as we know from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when Aisha radiallahu anha has told us, is that you make up the days of fasting that you missed due to menstruation. For example, and this is something that as most women probably, if they've gone through enough Ramadans, they've experienced. Maybe even for example, they are so we know that menstruation prohibits fasting and prayer. You make up the fasting, but you do not make up the prayers. But some things that can be sometimes frustrating is when maybe there's an hour or even just a half hour left before breaking your fast on one of the days of Ramadan, or even maybe it's the first day, or maybe it's the last day, or any time, and all of a sudden you realize that the cycle has begun, and so then that fast of that day does not count. But you have the rukhsa for eating at that time, and that's kind of an enforced rukhsa, or it's I should say a mani', a preventative. It is a preventative from fasting, and so and when we say that it is a preventative, that means also that those individuals, that women who are experiencing menstruation or postpartum bleeding, for example, they gave birth right before Ramadan, or they gave birth during Ramadan, for example, that they are not asked to fast. And what that means is that even if they do fast, it would not be accepted of them, because it is you are bringing an action which you were not asked to do. And it's the cycle prevents the fasting from being recognized in that sense. But of course, when a person fasts, just like something happens in the latter part of the day, inshallah ta'ala, we hope that they will be rewarded for their intention at the beginning of the day, and for doing what they were asked for. When you continuously follow what the Sharia guides you to, then you will be rewarded every single step of the way. Just like when you, for example, if you are praying and you realize in the second rak'ah, for example, that, wait a minute, I don't have wudu, did I? And then you come to the conclusion that you do not have wudu, and so you leave off prayer, you go make wudu, and then you come back to prayer. The bowing, the standing, the sujood, and the tilawah of the Quran, the recitation of the Quran that you do, I mean, all these are acts of worship, and you are doing them, believing in them with the proper intention at that time. And so there's some reward for that, even if you did not get the specific reward, or are specifically doing Salat al-Asr, for example, at that time, or fasting a day from the month of Ramadan at that time. So you still have some reward, even if it's not the reward or the action that you originally set out to receive. Now, the opposite of that, what if, for example, a person realizes that they hit puberty in the middle of the day, they were not previously fasting, and they suddenly saw signs, or maybe it was exactly 15 years, and from their birth, as some scholars mentioned, for example, that even when you as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned that for puberty and counting puberty, you would go by the at the age of 15. And so with Islam, you would think of your Hijri date, the date that you were born in Hijri. So for example, the date that I was born, my Hijri date, my Hijri birthday was the 28th of Dhul Hijjah, the 28th of Dhul Hijjah, which also happens to be the same Hijri birth date of my second daughter. And so, for example, for her, if she was born at 6:30 p.m. So when she hits 15 in Hijri years, she would hit 15 in Hijri years at 6:30 p.m. And if it happens to be wrong, well, it would be Dhul Hijjah. So, however, so at that moment, then prayer and accountability, if there have previously not been signs of puberty, then from this moment it becomes recognized, and they become fully accountable. And so what happens if someone becomes liable during the day? Then for example, whether they hit puberty during the day, or for example they started off the day sick, and then mashallah, tabarakallah, Allah is a shafi, and so they are cured and feel like they have the strength to fast. Or for example, they are traveling and then return home, then what do they do? So this is the ruling on this is that from most ulama is that they should start fasting from that point. And so, for example, for that reason, if someone accepts Islam, and it happens to be during the month of Ramadan, and we know that Ramadan is a virtuous month, and subhanAllah, it's no coincidence, no surprise that lots and lots of people accept Islam during the month of Ramadan, more so during the month of Ramadan than any other time of the year, practically. And so when they come and pronounce Shahada, we have to say, okay, from now on, you have to stop eating and drinking for the rest of the day. Even though if they already ate and drank in the beginning of the day, that fast, even with that fast will not count from them. But they do it because, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْهُ. So whoever witnesses the month, then let them fast it, except of course they have some preventative. And so as long as once these conditions here, accountability, healthy, residing Muslim, once all those conditions combine in a person, then they should observe the fast, even if that starts from the beginning or from the middle of the day. And the dalil for that, and the reasoning for that, and also the fact that they have to make it up as well, according to a number of scholars which I follow, is it comes from the Prophet ﷺ here, and this is one of the ahadith of Sahih Bukhari, and it's actually one of Imam Bukhari's thulathiyat. He only has about a dozen thulathiyat. These are the ahadith with the absolute shortest isnad, that just three people between Imam Bukhari and the Prophet ﷺ. And so this Sahabi, Salama ibn Aqwa, he says that the Prophet ﷺ commanded a man from the tribe of Aslam to announce among the people, أَنَّ مَنْ كَانَ أَكَلَ فَلْيَصُمْ بَقِيَّةَ يَوْمِهِ. So whoever has eaten, then let them fast the rest of the day. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَكُنْ أَكَلَ فَلْيَصُمْ. And whoever has not eaten, then they should also fast. فَإِنَّ الْيَوْمَ يَوْمُ عَاشُورَةٍ. Because this day is the day of Ashura. And this hadith actually comes from the time of the Prophet ﷺ before the obligating of fasting the month of Ramadan. the very first obligation of fasting came from the fasting of Ashura, and as some narrations mention that even Quraysh used to fast used to fast the day of Ashura, that is the 10th of the month of Muharram. And so, however, the Prophet ﷺ later said, once the month of Ramadan became obligatory upon the Muslims, then the Prophet ﷺ later said that whoever wishes to fast Ashura, then let them fast it, and whoever wishes not to, then they don't have to. Simple as that. And so, but however, this ruling and the way the Prophet ﷺ, however, the dealing with this fast, with this obligatory fast when Ashura was obligatory, the Prophet ﷺ was saying that here, that during this obligatory fast, whether you started off the day eating or whether you started off the day fasting, you have to fast the rest of the day. And so that was with Ashura. And so the scholars of Islam have said, if that was Ashura, then the month of Ramadan, the fasting of Ramadan, which is a pillar of Islam, then that has even greater hurma. Hurma. So when we talk about hurma and the concept of hurma, what's hurma? Hurma is that respect and sacredness that surrounds that object or that thing. And in this case, we're talking about the time of the month of Ramadan. It has a certain kind of hurma, even though it's not one of the sacred months, the 4 sacred months, Ashhur al-Hurum, it's not one of those 4, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and Rajab, it's not one of those 4. However, Ramadan is a Mubarak, it is a blessed month, and it has great hurma to it in different ways. It is, and when we say that it is a blessed month, that means that things done therein are increased, the good deeds are increased in their value, and if someone commits bad deeds, nas'alullah salama, then those bad deeds are also much, much worse in value. Just like how Mecca has great hurma, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said great threats about the one who, for example, in Surah Al-Hajj, great threats of the one who commits sin or atheism in the city of Mecca. And that's why, for example, some people have moved away out of Mecca, like even some of the Sahaba that moved away from Mecca just out of fear of the tremendous weight of committing sins while living in the sacred city of Masjid al-Haram. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. And whoever magnifies the symbols of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that is from the piety of the hearts. فَإِنَّهُ or فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. It is from the piety of the hearts. I have to verify that. I remember it's ayah 34 if I remember correctly. It's one of my favorite ayahs. But the meaning here that whoever فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ, that whoever magnifies the symbols of Allah, so it's important. We have to train, and especially also as parents and as families, for example, training ourselves to have this great respect for the month of Ramadan, and to recognize that during the day of Ramadan during the month of Ramadan there are different rules in place, and respecting those rules and making that sacred atmosphere for those rules. And so, for example, and part of that and respecting that month is just as we see with this command here from the Prophet ﷺ, that even if you have an excuse not to fast at the beginning of the day, but then suddenly that excuse goes away, even though that fast that day would not count, respect the month of Ramadan and fast the rest of it, and join the rest of the Muslims. Join the rest of the Muslims, unite with the rest of the Muslims who are fasting that day, so that you can break your 2, 3, 4 hour fast while they break their 18-hour fast, for example. and that way you can partake in something together and feel that bond, that ukhuwa, that fraternity, that brotherhood of Islam. And so the month of Ramadan, it's really, really important to make that a special month in a lot of different ways and to respect its hurmah. Okay, now who is excused from fasting? Although we mentioned some things already, so now a little bit of detail regarding that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and this is a phrase that is repeated a couple times with only a harf of difference. وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. And the first time it says فَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. So whoever is sick or traveling, then a number of days or a number from other days. In other words, they have to make up that which they miss from travel, due to travel or sickness. So let's look at that a little bit closer. What does it mean to be traveling? What does it mean to be sick? So with traveling, of course, with traveling, this goes back to the actual definition of travel in Islam. And with that, and with fasting, of course, some scholars have disagreed a lot. And with traveling, there's lots of disputes among the ulama and many, many different opinions of what is the duration, or what is the distance, what is the distance, or even the duration that constitutes travel in Islam. And especially in this time period, when the means of travel have changed considerably, and how we are essentially living in a global village. Although nowadays with the coronavirus, we're feeling far more isolated than ever before. And yeah, subhanAllah. But for the most part, in recent years, in recent decades, the ulama have essentially confined traveling to say that maradduhu ila al-urf, and that it goes back to custom and what people would consider travel, what your people in your locale would consider travel, for example. And as long as, but there are certain basic requirements. Now, this isn't really much of an issue for Muslims, because most Muslims they do quite a lot of travel within the United States, especially, or within their state or wherever. But maybe with new Muslims, maybe with converts to Islam, there are folks that live, maybe they live in a city like Pittsburgh or other, and they've spent their entire lives maybe just on one side of the city, or they have not traveled out of state their entire lives. And it might be that those around them have, in their neighborhood or village, might be the exact same for the most part. And so for individuals like that, then maybe traveling might have a different meaning than, for example, someone who every other day or every day they commute 2 hours this way and then 2 hours on the way home, for example. And depending. And so that travel has a different definition. And if anyone has any questions regarding specific travel that they have during the day or during the month of Ramadan, or specific driving or whatever the case might be, they can send it to me, inshallah ta'ala. But generally speaking, if it's not going to cause hardship, then inshallah ta'ala, then it might be best to observe fasting, as the Prophet ﷺ has said, "Da' ma yuribuk ila ma la yuribuk." Leave alone that which doubts you for that which causes no doubt. And by observing that qaida in your life, you find a lot of things become easier, a lot of decisions become easier, inshallah ta'ala. But oh yeah, with sickness, ultimately you have to become the faqih of yourself. A lot of scholars would say that when it comes to estimating the degree of your sickness, go see a doctor, or to, that would be decided by a physician how sick you are or whether or not you should fast. And that's however, here in the United States, where, for example, visiting a doctor or visiting a physician costs a lot of money. For example, depending on what kind of insurance you have, even if you have insurance, it still costs, $40 or $50 or $80 or $100 depending. Or maybe you even have to wait a month to get an appointment. In a lot of cases, you have to be faqih nafsik. You have to be the jurist of yourself and introspective of yourself, and weighing yourself in the sense of knowing yourself. And so while ulama have generally stated that, for example, symptoms of fasting, like a headache, this does not allow you to break your fast, generally speaking. Other minor symptoms, perhaps like a runny nose, or a very, very low grade sore throat, perhaps might not be cause for breaking fast. But however, if there are symptoms that are increased or that you fear would make it worse for you, and that fasting would either exacerbate those symptoms, or that by fasting you would make it make it harder on you in different ways, then it would probably be best to take that rukhsa, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ كَانَ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. Whoever is fasting or traveling, then a number of days from outside the month of Ramadan and after the month of Ramadan. And so that's a rukhsa that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with. And just looking at the I made a mistake. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيضًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرَ. That's the first one. Okay, that got in my mind. Okay. So with that, the sickness involved, this is like, for example, and this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that Allah loves that you take his rukhas. And I'm dwelling on this point a little bit, that Allah loves that you take his concessions, because many of us, for example, if we are used to fasting all 30 days of Ramadan, or all 29 days of Ramadan, or maybe only break our fast in case of, for example, women in menstruation, for example, and you feel sickness, or you feel something that fasting is making it a lot worse and making it very, very difficult for your livelihood, for example, for your work, then it might be permissible. It might very well be permissible and important for you to take that rukhsa. More than permissible, in fact, maybe recommended or even obligatory, depending on the medical condition. I remember when I was first in April of 2014, I lost my voice, and after that I lost my voice for 3 days. I could not utter a sound as much as I tried. Even if I tried screaming, for example, no sound would come out. And then afterwards, my voice slowly returned, and I've had a sore throat ever since for 6 years. And it gets worse during fasting. It's called laryngopharyngeal reflux, and there are lots of studies about it and how fasting makes it worse. And so, for example, with this condition, and for example, on different forums that I participate in, for different support groups, with talking to other Muslims and finding out that they also For example, if the pain gets too much during the day, they'll either, if they continue fasting, they'll either lose their voice and their pain gets worse. And for example, some people maybe someone's a teacher, or maybe, they're it really hurts their livelihood quite a bit. Or, they if they or they'll take the rukhsa and break their fast. And for them, I mean, it's important to save yourself and your livelihood, and so that you can enjoy the fast. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ease for you and does not want hardship. Allah does not want hardship. He doesn't want you to go through the month, just sulking because of pain that you're in, because of the worship, because of the ibadah. This is why, if you find it painful or difficult to stand while praying, you can pray sitting down. If that's impossible, or if that's very, very painful, and to the point that you are more distracted and thinking about the pain than you are about the actual, Quran that you're reciting or the tasbih that you're making, then go ahead and lay down whatever it takes, whatever you need to do in order to get through that act without anything that's going to be debilitating. Now, when it comes to pregnant and breastfeeding, this is not mentioned in the Quran. However, there are a hadith about the subject. And when we talk about travelers or sick, we also say, O men fi ma'nahuma, whoever is experiencing what they are similarly experiencing. And looking at the maqasid of the Sharia, for example, the goals of the Sharia. And so, for example, and and so because of that, especially breastfeeding, for example, anyone that has experienced breastfeeding knows that you have to continuously, drink lots of water and also eat regular meals, or else, the milk supply could dry up. And especially fasting, and maybe someone has, maybe due to errands, this or that or the other, or busyness one night, and maybe they are not able to take a proper iftar or suhoor, for example, and so that could have a detrimental effect for their child. Now, the ulama have said that what's interesting here is that some of the scholars of Islam, specifically the Hanbali madhab, which for the most part I follow, have distinguished between a woman that fears injury to herself due to the fasting, as opposed to a woman that feels safe herself due to the fasting, however fears that by fasting it could be detrimental to her child, whether the child is unborn or born and breastfeeding. And the difference between those two would be that the one that fears for herself, then she can make qada later, but as for the one that fears for the child, then she performs fidya and qada. Fidya and qada. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, inshallah ta'ala. But if anyone is actually in that situation, go ahead and message me just for clarification on that, inshallah ta'ala. But also, in addition, anything and everything with mashaqqa that's affecting your fast, or basically affecting your deen or your living, your livelihood. And when we say mashaqqa, we're talking about more than simply, a mild headache, a caffeine headache. Which reminds me, you should be, if you have 4 cups of coffee a day, go down to 3 cups starting tomorrow. If you have 3 cups a day, then go down to 2 starting tomorrow. I weaned myself off of coffee a month ago, but for other reasons. However, so when it comes to mashaqqa, generally, if it has to do with, this is a kind of hardship, and if that hardship is that which could make your fasting or your livelihood in any way very, very difficult, or even threatening in some way, short term or long term, then definitely break the fast. I remember several years ago in Pakistan hearing about, I wasn't there, but I was hearing about soaring summer temperatures and people actually dying from the fast and actually passing away during the day due to heat stroke because of the fast. And even scholars in the region were telling them you do not have to fast, and you should not fast if you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have proper things to keep you cool and stuff. So, however, and so that's you're actually by not taking that rukhsah for the sake of preserving yourself. This is not something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you to do, and that would not be virtuous. You should not be performing something that cuts your life short when it's not absolutely tantamount to the faith and to the religion. Fasting is important, but one thing that's interesting, and one thing that you can remember as a qaida or a general rule in Islam in general, is that between obligations and between prohibitions, now things that you have to do and things that you must not do, what's interesting is that the Sharia allows breaking both at times. However, you can forsake an obligation, or you can downgrade the method of performing an obligation, or delaying or putting off an obligation in the case of mashaqqa, in the case of difficulty and hardship, like traveling, like sickness. However, when it comes to the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, abstaining from riba, abstaining from eating khanzir, abstaining from zina, abstaining from these things, then that is not, if you are experiencing mashaqqa, too bad. You have to toughen up and be patient and maintain sabr. Those prohibitions would not fall off ever, except for something that is further, something that is greater than mashaqqa, which is known as darura, which means that you can basically only preserve yourself or preserve your livelihood. The only way for you to preserve your livelihood, the only way to preserve your nafs and yourself and your life, for example, or the lives of others, is by breaking this prohibition of Islam. And in that case, it would not be breaking the prohibition, it would become halal for you at that moment. على قدر الضرورة or على قدر المشقة. So by the degree of pressingness and dire necessity, then that prohibition becomes allowed by that same degree. And when it comes to obligations, by the degree of hardship that you experience, then that obligation might change or transform according to that degree. So for example, with fasting, it would be delayed, or there might be a fidya instead. You either make up the fast or you perform fidya. And just like with prayers, you cannot, now like for example, poverty can keep you from performing hajj, poverty can keep you from giving zakat, and sickness can keep you from fasting. However, nothing ever keeps you from praying. The only change that takes place is just how you pray, whether you're standing or sitting or laying down. But you always must pray on time for the rest of your life. وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. Continue worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until the certainty comes to you. And as we mentioned before, when it comes to sickness, I should have put this earlier, is you have to be the faqih of yourself and engage your heart. And if you really feel like the fasting is causing you suffering, then with sickness, then go ahead and break the fast. One final note, inshallah ta'ala, and this has to go with traveling, is scholars have differed over which is preferred. Is it preferred to fast while traveling if someone feels strength to do it, or is it preferred not to? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Laysa min al-birr as-siyam fi as-safar." في السفر, that it's not from righteousness to fast while traveling. It is not from righteousness. So, for example, now that hadith is important, so that, for example, let's say you and another Muslim are traveling, or with your family, you're traveling together, your Muslim family, or you and your Muslim buddies, your Muslim colleagues, friends, brothers, whatever the case may be, and during Ramadan, one of you wants to fast, the other one doesn't. There's no pressure. No one's better than the other. No one is better than the other in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, some ulama have said that, based on other different evidences, that if it's really, really easy for you to fast, then, and you find absolutely no difficulty whatsoever, go ahead and fast while traveling. And especially also if your work is travel, and you have become accustomed to travel. And travel does not really, you don't feel travel puts you in any hardship whatsoever, or your work is travel. Like, for example, those who drive trucks, semis, big rigs throughout the country, for example. And those are some of the few people who are working in their normal capacity, even in these days of the coronavirus pandemic. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Whatever I've said of right is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and whatever I've said of wrong, of which are many things, Allahumma musta'an, is from my sinful self and shaitan. So inshallah ta'ala, next time we'll talk about some of the nullifiers of fasting, and also some of the things which are disliked during fasting, and also some common questions about, what's the ruling on this or that or the other. For example, insulin, asthma inhalers, things like that, that are common questions about fasting, inshallah ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بارك الله فيكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.